Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is the first episode of the Jagged Iron Podcast. I'm here today with a longtime friend, Gino, and I'm going to have him introduce himself now.
Hey Nick, hi everybody. Thank you for having me here. My name is Eugenio Trabalano, but everybody knows me as Gino Nessuno. I was born in Italy, and I am a combat sport instructor and former fighter. I have mainly competed in Savate French kickboxing, international road kickboxing, Muay Thai, and full contact kickboxing. This last citation actually might let you know how old I am, if you are familiar with combat sports. I'm the current National Technical Advisor for the United States Savate Federation, a small non-profit organization that promotes Savate French kickboxing in the United States.
What exactly is Savate?
Savate is a form of kickboxing that was generated in France during the 19th century. It first started as a form of self-defense that evolved in the 20th century, the first part of the 20th century, into a competitive sport. It was mixed with English boxing in the 19th and 20th century, and it was codified in a competitive form, which is what we see nowadays in the rings around the world.
So what's the biggest difference? I noticed you mentioned a ton of kickboxing styles. What's the biggest difference between Savate and regular, just any kickboxing?
Well, overall, kickboxing is kickboxing. It's a form of competition with punches and kicks. You can have different rules that might, like in this case, influence the sport extremely. Savate allows the use of reinforced shoes for fighting, and that makes the kind of striking much more dynamic and much more aerobic as far as use of energies. You can kick hard, you can kick light, but the fact that you have reinforced shoes...
Just like the French, always trying to kick light.
Yes. But, allows you a different distance, because now you can reach with an extra 3 inches, 4 if you have long feet. And you can strike with a hard shoe that allows you to tap, but at the same time achieve a certain strength.
Is it like a specialty shoe, or is it just kind of...
It is very similar to boxing and wrestling shoes, more like wrestling shoes because they're not tall as the boxing one, but they're reinforced on the heel and on the tip of the shoe, so you can kick harder.
What was the original purpose for that reinforced style?
It's just originally the sport came out as a form of self-defense, so the sport always evolved with shoes because that's what you wear when you are walking around. Actually, part of the original style includes also cane fighting, which is actually its own form of competition too, because in the old days every gentleman used to go around with a cane.
Do you ever carry a cane
no,
when you're walking around?
If you ever decide to be a pimp or something, that's the image that I have.
This is the combat sport for pimps, is what you're trying to say.
That's right.
So were you always doing Savate, or were there other sports that you did as a kid, or?
Oh, that's a long story. I started in 1986 doing full contact kickboxing in Rome, Italy, and at the time, I didn't know much about these sports. I just knew that I wanted to do karate and martial arts. My mother never wanted me to do these kind of things. I did all sorts of things, swimming, tennis. I never liked them, and when I turned 14, I convinced my mother to let me try this full contact kickboxing, because my mother didn't know it was like a form of martial art. So I started doing this sport, and it was a gym a couple of miles away from my house, and I still remember it nowadays. It was an old school, old style martial art gym, and you would go there, and every training session you would end up sparring with advanced fighters, and you will learn fast to either fight back, avoid punches and kicks, or run. Because it was brutal. It was like every time somebody would have a black eye. It was a old school, very different from what we do today.
How old were you at this time?
14. Then a couple of years later, they opened a gym near my apartment building, actually a block away. So I joined the gym, and that's where I learned the variety of combat sports, learning from my first instructor, Master Ciro Cortese, which at the time introduced me into the different styles of Savate, international rule kickboxing, and Muay Thai. That was at the end of the 80s when sports like international rule kickboxing and Muay Thai were developing a lot in Europe and becoming big. And Savate was already around, but was more like a French, Italian, and Belgian thing. With the interaction of these different styles, the sports became bigger, and now we are where we are with the International Savate Federation.
We should actually probably mention that you're originally from Italy.
Yes, I'm from Italy, and the accent that I have is actually from New Hampshire.
How come you moved here originally?
Two things. My wife is American. She's from here.
So you're a mail order husband.
Pretty much, yes. I met my wife during one of my vacations in the U.S. I came here to learn more about this country. I'm always, I should say, I was always fascinated by the difference in culture between Europeans and Americans, and for somebody, like living here or living there, until you start traveling abroad, you don't see these differences.
For one thing, we don't fight with shoes on.
Correct. I first met Americans in Europe. At the time, I couldn't speak any word of English. They actually spoke Italian, and I was so fascinated by the different way of thinking that first thing I did after I met these people, I signed up for an English class when I went back to school, and since then, I traveled the country, meaning the United States, to learn more about it. Then eventually I met my wife, and in 2000 we moved back here. And since we are established there, New Englander since then.
That's actually really cool. So you met Americans and you were fascinated with kind of the difference. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Pragmatism is the main thing that comes to mind. Americans.
Maybe in dumber words, because I didn't understand what that meant.
The way of being very decided on what to do, very driven, task-driven, and very oriented toward achieving a goal more than what I was used to coming from a working family in Italy, where your job is your job, you get a job for life, and hope for the best. I never liked that attitude, and also, the capability to overcome obstacles. One of the things I always liked about the United States is that, no matter what the issue is, everybody tends to roll the sleeves and work towards a solution, while in Italy it's always, at least where I used to live, Rome is in a lot of ways like Washington DC. It's a bureaucratic city, so it's all about politics there, and there was always a pointing fingers to somebody else for whatever happened, never like that. So when I had the opportunity to travel, discovering more about the US, I got more and more in love with the opportunity to move back to this side of the world.
That's really interesting. I feel like most Europeans don't have that idea of America, or at least Americans don't think that Europeans have that idea of America.
Yeah. I have to actually, sometimes I get aggravated with when I talk with people, because the thing that I don't like about Americans is that the expectation is that I move to this country to find better opportunities. Conversely, actually, I had the same opportunities no matter what if I stayed in Italy or here. But there is this big, and it's understandable. It comes from, the great migrations that we had last century and before toward this country. So it's engraved in the American psychology. But it's it's a little bit offensive sometimes when people say, "Oh, you came here for better opportunities." Like, we live in the 21st century. There is opportunities everywhere.
We have the internet. You can do pretty much whatever you want, anytime you want.
And there is more hotspots in Rome than here, for example.
I was actually talking to someone not that long ago who was amazed that they have internet in other countries. They didn't realize that they had the internet in other countries.
That's the attitude sometimes that you get from Americans. But again, overall, I always liked the capabilities to overcome problems. That's what drove me here. Sometimes I think about going back to Europe, and I wonder if I would have. Now that I'm so used to work here, to get certain reactions from people, I wonder if going back there would be more deterring than anything else.
Well, if with your Americanized way of living, it might be hard to go back to a bureaucratic society where it's just kind of like shrug your shoulders and go through the day.
Correct. That's the main thing. And the other thing is the accent. Jokes aside, when I'm here, everybody makes fun of my European accent, but when I go back there, everybody makes fun of my
Well, they probably don't
American
realize
accent.
who they're making fun of because they're going to get your reinforced shoe to the toe, or to the face. Reinforced toe to the face. Hopefully you're a lot more flexible than being able to kick someone in the toe.
I am.
Little back on point. What originally drew you to Savate instead of other styles of kickboxing? Or what made you move in that direction more?
Initially, it was, just by accident. I was looking for a kickboxing gym, and I stumbled to the gym that I mentioned close to my house. I started going there, and the instructor at the time, Master Cortese, was very into Savate. And that's how I started. We did a lot of Muay Thai, a lot of Savate. And what drove me more towards Savate was the drills, the complexity of the drills, the precision of the strikes, and the methodology of training. Savate, like boxing, comes from a methodology of sport, a tradition. Let me rephrase: not a tradition, but a scientific approach to competition. Conversely to traditional martial arts, where you would do certain things just because they need to be done. I give you an example, which is not a bad example, but it shows a substantial difference. Traditional Muay Thai training, if you go in a lot of camps in Thailand, that's an hour of running in the morning, half an hour of pads or hitting bags, then you take a break and you redo it in the afternoon. There is an engraved methodology because obviously you're working your endurance, your strength, and your techniques into a combined workflow, but it's just a standard workflow a lot of times. It changes for athletes, obviously, at a certain level, but in the boxing and Savate tradition, you have a methodology of training that's based on strengthening, endurance, aerobic workout versus anaerobic workout. All these components come together and are trained not just within the gym by doing the sports that you're doing, but also doing other disciplines like powerlifting, weight conditionings, and so on.
I feel like a lot of times, actually, on that point, that athletes, especially fight athletes, who kind of almost make fighting their identity, I feel like more so than other sports, we kind of really we're fighters, and every day we live as a fighter, and every day, pretty much everything we do kind of encompasses that fighting methodology. I feel like a lot of times we work for no other reason than just to work, as opposed to, and it's really hard sometimes, if you have a rest day, to actually rest. And I feel like that's a big thing with fighters. It's a lot of times there's no reason, or they do more than necessary just because they feel like they need to.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Sometimes I think it's also driven by lack of knowledge in sport methodology and science. Like you said, you need your breaks, you need your recovery time, and One thing that I noticed, for example, in one of the gyms where I'm still training actually, some of the athletes will be in the gym for 4 or 5 hours, and then when we sparred, when an old man like me, that just trains 1 hour, 1.5 hour every day, I could be going on for 12 rounds, and they were getting ready for competitions, and after 5 rounds were tired, The fact that
to be fair, you call yourself an old man, but at one time you were ranked second in the world rankings for kickboxing.
No, that's imprecise. I was ranked second in my country, and 10th in the amateur WKA international ranking.
Okay, so 10th in the world.
Yeah.
So that's still pretty fucking good.
Thank you.
It's got to be hard, at least in strength style sports. Kind of the better you get, it's almost like the less. It's more about practicing the skill than it is about getting stronger, or. For instance, like a lot of really high-level powerlifters or Olympic athletes or Olympic lifting athletes, they don't necessarily use a lot of like accessory work, more so than like an intermediate lifter who's lifting, who has more weaknesses to address. The higher level is more, usually they're just doing a few exercises, as opposed to maybe like 10 or 15 or probably less than that, but overall through the training week.
Yeah, absolutely, it's a good point. Going back, for example, to those couple of athletes that used to train that are now retired. Great athletes, don't get me wrong, but I always argue with them, that you don't need to spend, 4 or 5 hours in the gym and train, let's say, half an hour, then taking a break, then train another 20 minutes, and so on. You can concentrate that in an hour and a half of good workout and just call it a day. But that, gives you more free time to recover and to do other things that are necessary for you to maintain a balance between mind and body as an athlete. You can, like, going back to what you said, you cannot be in the gym 24/7, 7 days a week, because eventually you hit a plateau and you're gonna get into overtraining. It happens to the best of us, and that's part of also becoming a professional athlete, learning how to manage your training sessions.
Have you traveled to other parts of the world and trained with, like you mentioned, Muay Thai? Have you ever traveled to Thailand or anywhere, or maybe like, where do the Dutch train? Wherever the Dutch train.
Netherlands.
The Netherlands.
Yes. I trained mainly in France and Italy and United States. I traveled to Netherlands and I didn't make it to Thailand. Sorry. Mainly because throughout my years when I was fighting, I never had the money to make such a big trip. Now I have more money to do that, but I have a family and other priorities. So one day I will take that trip down there. It's also not my priority now to become more accustomed with Muay Thai, because not that I don't like the traditional aspect, but I know the sport. I practiced the sport for so long that my style of Muay Thai, being more European, it's a solid style.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but in Savate there's no checking, which is blocking kicks with the shin,
Yes.
so shin to shin contact.
Yep.
Why is that?
I should say that there is a checking in Savate in certain forms. Savate Defense, which is the what we used to call Savate in the old days, where it's basically the self-defense form of Savate. You use checking, you use also some illegal ways of striking that are not allowed to be used during competition in Savate French kickboxing. I would say that probably the reason why is that checking comes from a Indonesian peninsula, Indonesian tradition of fighting style. Muay Thai and all the styles of the Indonesian peninsula, like can't remember the names. Sorry, Romanian. It's hard sometimes to think about names in English when you learn them in Italian. But anyway, all that area and all those very similar fighting styles use checkings, elbows, and knees, and clinching. While more traditional styles like karate or even American styles of kickboxing that come from the old Kempo style from Ken Parker and all the old great American masters don't have shin checking included. I think it's just a development, particularly from a specific area of the world, that eventually made its way through the rest of the world as the sport of Muay Thai developed, as the interaction developed. For European particularly, that became a big thing in the late 80s and early 90s when the Dutch fighters came from a series of a lot of wins and great development experience from Thailand. They developed their own style of Muay Thai, international rule kickboxing, which was more focused on boxing, points, and all the other great techniques that Muay Thai allows. For those people that don't know it, when listening to this podcast, Muay Thai allows striking with punches, but they're not counted as strikes. So it's not like in boxing, you do 3 punches and you get points for that. It's just a punch. If you take your adversary down, you knock him out or knock her out, it's considered as a valid strike. But other than that, it's just a punch. So that, going back to the conversation where we're talking about rules before, that kind of forced the sport to focus more on certain other techniques like elbows and knees, while the European style allowed counting of those punches, therefore made the sport much more like international rule kickboxing. Savateurs, fighters that do savate, started competing against Dutch fighters, and at the time the style of guard and striking that we had from up to the 80s became a little bit inappropriate. It was not good enough because it was too much on the side, more like American style kickboxing. It would expose your leg too much, so Salvatores had to adjust their guard, becoming a little bit more frontal and strengthening their roundhouses. That translated also into the sport itself, and if you look at old videos on YouTube of old savate from the 80s versus the one from the 90s and today, you see a much more frontal guard that balances side kicks with roundhouses, conversely to the old style that was much more focused on the long distance of the side kick.
What I've always found really interesting about savate as opposed to other styles is there's almost no orthodox to southpaw difference. It just seems like you guys can utilize both sides equally, and you're almost facing completely forward, and you use like a circular motion.
Correct.
So watching a high-level saboteur, there's almost no standing still, and they're almost always moving in a circle. And I've always found that very hard for other styles to kind of get a hold on that, because most styles are you stand in the middle of them.
Correct.
And you just bang.
Yeah.
As opposed to in savate, there's so much movement. Watching 2 high-level savateurs go at it is, very interesting to watch. It's very fast. The point system, I know that like keeping score, a lot of times we've talked a little bit about you keeping score, and it's almost like you can't even look at the card. You just have to write and hope that you're getting everything down.
Well, one of the things I always laugh about is, if you watch kickboxing competitions in this country and any other country, they have a counter for kicks, and you gotta do at least 8 to 10 kicks within a 2-minute round. And I always laugh because of my youngest student, can do that usually in 30 seconds, and not because just you have to do something fancy, just coherent and good kicks that go in, and just the kind of style. Again, it's kickboxing, it's arm and legs, and Savat focuses a lot, combining the two. While when you get other styles of kickboxing, and I don't mean it in a negative way, that just because of the rules or because of the tradition, they tend to focus on something different. For example, if you take the American style of kickboxing from the waist above, once you have the rule that you cannot kick legs, the majority of your target is protected. It's very hard to throw a kick that goes under your opponent's arms. You can do it, but it doesn't go in all the time. Therefore, you're left with the face as your main striking point to make a difference. And with that, with the protection that you have in your legs, with some of the kicks that people throw, the sport tend to develop around the boxing aspect, and that's why you have that limitation, the requirement of 8 to 10 kicks per round, because people tend to focus on the boxing. You see it also a lot in MMA nowadays, focusing more on the boxing than those kicks. Now MMA does it for other reasons, because obviously you can take down, but still you're tending to strengthen one aspect more than another one, and you will always find yourself in a situation that you could use a kick on a leg. It's easy to throw and to take away, but if you don't use them, you find yourself in situations where you're gonna keep attacking high and always forget to kick low where you could have made some damage. That's muscle memory, and that's how it goes.
At least when we used to I don't know if I mentioned this, but Gino was a coach of mine for a long time. I've probably known him for at least 12 years.
Yeah,
I would say, because I started when I was like 14.
Yeah.
So, and one thing you always taught us was, the first round you almost solely focus on the legs.
Correct.
And try to stop, because once your opponent can't move, again with that style of going around, it's so easy. Then by the third round you can start headhunting because they can't do anything else. They're usually so fucking. And one thing about those shoes that I've noticed is it does a really good job if your legs aren't conditioned to getting kicked with those shoes. It can cause cramps that makes it almost, especially with the reinforced heel. I know a lot of times, actually just the other day when I was sparring with someone, one of your students, they caught me with a side kick with a heel, and my leg was dead because I haven't done leg kicks in like forever.
Yeah, no, it's a valid point. The shoe, again, it's reinforced, so it does that damage. You can do that damage also without shoes, if you place a good shin kick. Or, what I do a lot, for example, I train a lot of MMA fighters, and I'm trying to drill with them the idea of using their side kick. Funny that I mentioned this because I was talking with somebody in the United States Savate Federation. There is a trainer, I can't remember the name, I'm sorry about it, from Brazil. And he's moving to California, and we're trying to help him with his visa. And I wish I could remember his name. I'm really bad with names, even yours, it took me a while to learn. Probably 12 years.
He just got it today.
I wrote it down. It might be the boxing, that my cell brain.
We're not known for our rocket science.
But he trained Anderson Silva down there, and actually one of the things that he drilled with him was the side kick. You see it a lot. You see it a little bit used in MMA now because it doesn't expose you too much. It does some damage, and keeps your opponent a distance, kind of like a jab, but it doesn't put you in a harm situation if it gets caught, because you can regroup it fairly fast and move it out of the way. It's not the only tool that you have in your arsenal, but it can be used, and you want to use it with your heel, with a hard part. You don't want to use the whole foot, because particularly on sweat, you can slide off and you can put yourself in danger. You don't achieve the same damage, because if you use the length of your foot, there are parts that are not as strong as your heel, so therefore you want to stick with that part, and you keep your leg contracted by using your heel in the right way so you don't fall into your opponent's strikes.
one thing I feel like isn't utilized enough in MMA is the lead front kick. You don't see it very much.
Yeah.
I feel like you and my other coaches always told me to almost use it like a jab. I mean, granted, I couldn't throw any other kicks because of flexibility issues. But I was pretty good with my lead front kick because it was really, it was probably the best tool, like you said, tool in my toolbox for keeping people off of me. So, I don't really know where I was going with that. But there you go. Was it ever confusing training in so many different styles, kind of going into competition, remembering what rules you were supposed to be using? I mean, like if Savate and Muay Thai are so different, and kickboxing is a whole nother thing.
You want to train, they're very compatible as styles. I mean, the different rules. So the basic methodology is the same. You train with the same kind of conditions, but you need to adjust your distances, certainly. When you start talking about MMA, now you bring in another component of, taking down, ground fighting. It becomes even more complicated. At my time, during my time, there was no MMA, unless UFC was coming out, but, it was mainly an American thing.
And it was illegal.
You could, easily train your stand-up fightings in what we used to call at the time interstyle. Just melt it together. Throw with your shin kicks and with your feet. The problem with that I have is that when you are at a beginner level, you might get into bad habits. You cannot discern between the styles eventually down your career. But I was fortunate to work well with the basics and learn how to distinguish them. With that said, it was not uncommon when I swap between styles. When you go for matches, they tell you, you're gonna do kickboxing, so I would focus on the last third of last 3 weeks, I would say, of my camp on that style. I would work out without shoes, shorter distances, and then they would change my file to Savate or vice versa. And your distances and your timings can be a little bit off. You can overcome them, but you get into the ring, if you used to go with a little bit more power and without shoes, you gotta pick up the pace.
So I think one of the biggest things in Savate is or at least that I always noticed, was the light sparring. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times you guys are always going light. Mm-hmm. What are kind of the benefits of that, or the negatives too of not getting in that hard sparring? Well, like you might see in like the Dutch style.
Yeah, I don't see negatives. Let me elaborate on that. When I started, I mentioned that I was going to a gym, where it was always hard fighting, and that's a style. It's more traditional style. The problem is that you're now young for the rest of your life. Actually, a good part of your life, I should say, and you're gonna pay for that, no matter what people tell you. It's the same thing as you do when you do traditional martial arts. You can hit a stone, you can strengthen your arm, your hands in the sand. Eventually, you're gonna pay because you're gonna be having calcification, arthritis, and issues that are associated with that. By sparring hard all the time, you're eventually going to have damages on your body, if not on your head. Granted that we don't do distribute strikes like in boxing, so you get a little bit more distributed damage throughout your body instead of just your head. But it can be, for example, one of my best friends, my sparring partner Marco Gilotti in Italy, we used to fight and train together all the time. Even with the kind of training that we had, eventually dislocated one of my discs close to my neck, and every once in a while when I turn around it just locks. I broke his kneecap with a kick one time, and it still reminds me.
As revenge?
No, I don't remember the dynamic, which one happened first, but I do remember that, how it happened to him. Mine, it felt more like a little bit of a pain. And at the time, I was young, it was not hurting so much, but getting older, this kind of stuff doesn't go away, it just piles up. And Marco reminds me every time that I go visit him in Italy that, the weather is changing and his knee is hurting, So these things happen, and you want to avoid them as much as possible. One time, a great French fighter taught me a great lesson, François Pinocchio. You want to enjoy your years of fighting, you want to get the best that you can from it, but you also want to make sure that you don't spend all that money that you're making now, which at the time was little, into painkillers when you get older, because you have to deal with all the damage that you build. So part of the idea of Savate is built, again, being built on methodologies. In a lot of ways, is like Olympic boxing. Focusing more on the distance, the drills, the scoring than the damage. It's not that we don't do hard sparring, but if you don't have to do it, you don't do it all the time. For example, when I was training for competitions, in my camps, I would do hard sparring more at the beginning of the camp, so I could have recovered by the end. And I would always do it once or twice a week, but I would spar almost 3 to 5 times a week. The fact that you spar light allows you to get those distances and the conditions of a sparring and fighting situation without hurting yourself. It also allows you, at a novice level, to be more bold and try something that you wouldn't do in hard sparring. If you are sparring with somebody that puts you in a defense mode because they're hitting you hard, you will always be in defense mode. And if you are, for example, a novice, you are not going to try to spin and throw a side kick because you're going to be scared that this guy is going to beat you down. So the fact that you're doing light allows you to do more in that case. I do apply this approach with all my students at all levels, and you're able to do more. One thing that I also want to point out that, for example, in Savate we do have light competitions and full contact competitions, like it happens in kickboxing. But coming from a kickboxing background, my understanding, because that's what I was always told, was you start with light contact and you make your way up to the full contact, which is what you want to be. When I went to France, I actually discovered that for boxing and Savate, they do the opposite. They do light contact and full contact at the same time. They consider them both two different aspects of the fighter. And if you think about it, you could do a light contact competition as a preparation for a bigger event. If you had to train, for example, for let's say a national title, you might want to put in, you're going to do this national title in May, and you start training in September throughout your microcycle of workout. You want to put in some competitions to get there and get ready for the big event. You can choose to do three full contact fights, or you can choose to maybe do 2 full contact fights before the big event and put in 3 other live contact fights. Now, they still force you to work your skills in front of an audience against another competitor, but in a different way, with less damage overall, because the knockout aspect is not there. But they also force you to work your skills, because you have to control yourself to avoid the knockout. Your precision, your striking power need to be all there. And combining them with all the rest of the kind of competitions that you do, they will prepare you for that title the same way, if not better, than the first option, where you're going to do 3 full contact fights before, but potentially with less damage that you carry on to the big event.
Personally, I always actually found that high level light contact was actually more difficult than high level full contact, at least for me. A lot of times the competitors, they're a lot faster, and all those light hits over time still cause damage.
That is true. There's still damage.
Maybe not enough to stop the fight, but enough to, hurt you and make it a pain in the ass. And another thing is, a lot of times you can use full contact techniques to kind of keep the other person at bay. There's always that threat of that heavy punch coming in, whereas you don't have to worry about that so much with other fighting. So what was the transition like for you from fighter to coach?
It was almost natural. I always, like to teach other people.
You're bossy.
I'm bossy, yes. No, my wife is bossy.
She might hear this. She might hear this.
No, she never listens to stuff that I do outside of my phone, so. For all I know, she might not even know that I'm here. But I did like to teach since I was just a student, and that's how I got involved into ranking and developing my skills. I used to help my trainer at the time, and at the same time, actually, me learning how to teach other people, learning about methodology. One thing that people don't do much is, they learn within a system and they stay within the system because that's what they are taught by their instructor. But that helped me open my eyes and learn more about other sports, try other sports. I tried almost every martial art out there.
Oh, that's a tough.
The main one. Don't want to make it sound like.
I'm sure we're gonna get lots of hate for that. You've never tried the 7,000 types of martial arts that there are.
I've always been curious, and actually getting older and less into a competitive aspect of my life. I tend to enjoy more those things that at the time I never liked, like forms and things like that, But aside from that, I always like to help other people learning and developing the sport that I love. And the transition was almost natural. Eventually, I opened my own gym and start, teaching people there.
I just completely lost my train of thought. I just had somewhere I wanted to go with that. A lot of times fighters have a hard time transitioning out of fighting. It's really hard for them to, it's for me too, until I fought for a long time. When I stopped fighting, it was almost like I felt like I didn't have a direction to go in. Whereas, once I found powerlifting and stuff, was it easier of a transition for you to make instead of just kind of completely getting out of the game but going into coaching instead?
For a while, actually, for a good part of my career, I fought and taught people at the same time. It was not a big problem. When I got older, my last fight was in 1998, and after that, it was like a prestige fight.
How come you stopped fighting?
My life obviously got much more complicated. I was living with my wife. I was finishing my college degree, and I was getting into the work environment too. My other passion is design, illustration, and that was taking over. I had to balance the two things together, so my fighting career got a little bit less consistent, and just eventually I moved to the US and moved into graphic design and printing. You have to understand that I always wanted to do fighting. I always enjoyed it. It has always been my passion. But I always knew that I could not make a living out of it in the 90s particularly. UFC was coming up here, it was a great new wave of competing, but it was not what it is now. In the 90s, you had the WKA, the International Muay Thai Federation, the Savate Federation. You can make a living with getting a couple of bucks here from the fight and the other fight, and mainly teaching. Endorsing is almost inexistent. I don't know nowadays, but at the time there was no endorsing in Europe. Therefore, you had to have a job, and eventually that grew as my primary means of living. I was fortunate because it's still, in one of the two things that I love, so I never regretted moving away from fighting. I kept teaching, and since then I focus more on other people's achievements actually, but I never regretted it.
It sounds like you always had good coaches around you. At any rate, is there anything you would do now that you have the training knowledge you have now? Would you do anything differently as far as how you trained, when you trained, kind of anything at all?
As far as training, no. But again, it was always based on science and based on a solid methodology. So I always train, with a plan. I always had, since I can remember, written down tables of what I had to do every day, and and I was very diligent in doing it. What I would do different, what I learned throughout my years is that, a coach is worth 1,000 training, to paraphrase something else. Training sessions, I should say. The thing is that having a coach behind you and that tells you can do it goes a long way. Growing up into the sports, we didn't have a chance to talk about it, but eventually, because I like training, I like to learn about it. Me and my coach drift apart, and I started working out with different people around the country, everybody that could give me some direction. I learned a lot that way because I was a self-taught fighter, but it took a lot of motivation to go forward. I trained with a lot of people. Some of them decided to go back to their old ways and go to other coaches just because they couldn't bear the fact that they had to come every day in the gym, have a schedule, and say, today this is what I'm going to do. Other than go to the gym, have your coach say, today we're going to do this, and you can do it. I feel that I could have achieved more in my fighting career if I had a coach behind me, supporting me all the time, and motivating me those times that I felt that I shouldn't have taken that fight because I was not prepared. They could have pushed me to go a little bit farther. I really believe that, and achieve a better success than what I had. I'm pretty happy with my results, but I think I could have gone a little bit farther with that option. So when I train people, that's what I try to stress. When I'm behind somebody, I really focus on motivating them and making sure that they understand that they have to do all the work, but I will be there supporting them 100% and make sure that they will be successful.
It's interesting for me to see kind of the development over even the last 10, 12 years of kind of science of kind of science catching up with how people have been training for, like you said, since the 80s. It seems like a lot of times science will come out with a study or they'll say this or that is a better training methodology, and everyone will kind of say, yeah, no shit, we've been doing that for 20 years. And it sounds kind of like that was your experience as well.
Yeah.
Kind of going out and finding different schools of thought and different training and kind of taking it all together and putting it together yourself. It sounds like it kind of had that effect for you.
It did actually. And if you think about it, a good example is the calisthenic movement that we have nowadays, body weight workouts. Like, think about it, they've been doing that kind of workout in gymnastic forever, but now it's this big wave, and it's good. It comes back. We need to be challenged every once in a while and make ourselves better. One thing that I see, I used to be a big weightlifter.
His head is as big as it sounds. In real life, it's huge.
I used to love to lift weights, and a lot of my damages come from doing it incorrectly, and now that I'm older, and I have the skills to coach other people into those fields, I will coach them to do things differently than the way I did it. But again, it's methodology is methodology. What is important is the human biology and movements are always the same. What changes is the way we approach them and the consciousness that we apply to that approach.
One of the things I've noticed with training, like you said, and movement in general, is it almost seems like there's no new discoveries ever made. It's just kind of reintroducing something that people have forgotten about over the last 40 years.
Yeah, because your attention changes. You're focusing so much. Take, for example, the martial art history. In the 80s, was all about full contact. That was the ultimate fighting skill. You just stand up in front of your opponent, punch them and kick them. It's better than boxing. Then in the 90s it became Muay Thai because, you don't just kick and punch guys, you also elbow them and clinch them and knee strike them. Then it became MMA or Jiu-Jitsu because now, it's not just that, you also, you can take them down, so it's really a lot to do with the wave of interest that goes at the moment. I would argue that MMA it's a great sport, but it's a sport. It's not a self-defense situation like it was known, and it was not Muay Thai in the 90s and so on before. I mean, they're all sports codified within a fighting system that makes you a good athlete within the fighting system. When you go in the street, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah. A lot of times a good athlete is just a good athlete. Absolutely. Just no matter kind of where they end up. If they end up in, in America, a lot of times most of our great athletes go into football just because that's where the payday is.
Yeah.
Or boxing, as opposed to, even MMA, they're not getting paid or it's getting closer. But Mayweather made almost $500 million in his last fight.
Yeah.
They're just not going to be able to touch that once a year. Getting into a ring and making $500 million, it's going to be hard for other sports to really top that.
Absolutely. And that's what dictates also the style of fighting. It's funny that you say that, but if you think about it, there is no really kickboxing going on in the U.S. And it hasn't been that way for the last 5 to 7 years. There is here and there kickboxing competition,
which makes no sense to me personally, because I feel like kickboxing has all the exciting aspects of mixed martial arts without any of the ground game, which is what most people complain about.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you go on the other side, if you are more like a ground fighter, you are going to emphasize that aspect. I get that, But for example, the kickboxing fights that we see now, they are in hexagon, octagon cages and not in rings, and that's mainly because I get it, from an amateur perspective, you put together an event, you can put an extra couple of fights in. The problem is that the kind of style that we see now is degraded because a lot of these people are ground fighters trying to do kickboxing. Nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong, I'm not judging people doing it, but I don't see the other way around. I don't see good striking overall. You see it when, for example, UFC does these international Ultimate Fighter competitions. You see the different styles, and when it was US versus UK, you could see a clash of styles. You saw the last one with McGregor a little bit more. There is a different style in Europe than in the US. And again, I'm not judging which one is better. I'm just saying, that's the development. You have more similarity with Canada because we are nearby, and Brazil because there is a continuous flow of fighters between the countries. But when you go to Europe or Asia, the styles tend to change just because the nature of the development of the sports that you have, the panel of sports available to you to compete.
What was if MMA was as big then when you were fighting as it is today, do you think you would have gravitated more toward MMA, or do you think that you just enjoyed the stand-up kicking?
I would probably have done both. I enjoy MMA too. I cannot do much grappling or ground fighting, mainly because my right shoulder, my right knee are very damaged. So as soon as I get down, I try several times, but as soon as I get down, trying to do even just a little bit of pulling and pushing, my shoulder hurts, or if they get me in a armbar, forget about it. I'm not going to train for 2-3 months trying to recover it. So for me, I'm not at a point in my life that I have to improve my ground game. I know enough to coach people about it, and that's fine for me. I'd rather being able to train 5 to 6 days a week for my personal gain than try to perfect my armbar. And that's where I will leave it. But if I was competing now, probably I would get into that. It would be interesting to see how we develop. If I was in Europe, most likely I would still gravitate more on the stand-up aspect. Whether it's becoming big down there too. There is a much more involvement in MMA style competitions. There is shootboxing that has been around for a while, and it's more targeted toward strikers. Basically, you get down on the ground, but if you don't do anything, I believe within 10 seconds they get you back up. There is MMA styles that is becoming bigger in the Anglo-Saxons region, but it's trickling down the rest of Europe. So it's gonna get there. It's gonna be, to me, the MMA style is going to be the style that is going to be around for a while, mainly because of the big push of UFC, obviously. But it's not the only style, and it's good to see that nowadays you start seeing a little bit of comeback. We went like a full circle where we had the huge input from the jiu-jitsu, starting in the early 90s up to the end of the century, where we started seeing much more wrestling coming into the fighting arena. And then nowadays we start seeing a little bit more a shift toward kickboxing, kind of like, we got the ground game under control, but now we have to improve, and we gotta start working on the kickboxing aspect of it.
What's interesting, and a lot of people don't realize, unless you're kind of like interested in the history of kind of MMA and fighting in general, is in UFC 1, the final fight was between BJJ and Savat.
Yes.
And it's funny to see how fast BJJ took off after that fight.
Yeah.
Kind of everyone felt they needed to learn the ground game, but Savat did not take off the same way. Why do you think that is?
I think there are a couple of things there to consider. Maybe if the result went the other way around, Sabat could have done better. Let's not forget though that BJJ, continued to win on the second and third. I believe the third one too. So it just did a consistent job in showing that they were the solution for that.
And fast too.
Fast,
because the first, I think the first UFC, the final fight was over in 25 seconds.
Yeah.
Or something very similar to that.
Yeah, no, very, very fast. It definitely brought in a different aspect that nobody considered. When we are standing up, even when you clinch and control kicks, there is a limited aspect that ends when you get out of the clinch and go back into striking. When you put in somebody in a submission situation where you only can get out of it in a certain way, you gotta train it. Absolutely, the fighters there were not trained for that situation. But it definitely brought a lot of good things into the mix. I argue that it maybe brought too much, because then I had fighters coming to me that were great ground fighters, and they came to me that just wanted to learn a couple of punches and kicks so they could take their opponents down. And that's very limiting, because you can find yourself in a situation where you cannot take your opponent down, and now you don't have a good arsenal to counterattack your opponent. You need to have If you're fighting in a style, you need to know all the aspects of that style so you can manage the fight in the different situations that you're given to solve. You can not be a one-trick pony, just being a stand-up fighter or a ground fighter in MMA, because you will never be complete. You can be a better fighter, I guess, if you're an MMA fighter. You can be under control in the environment that we have today if you are a ground fighter, but again, it doesn't give you all the whole arsenal that you could potentially use and show into your fights. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think especially in like maybe the last 5 years, it's gone more from being just kind of in MMA. It's gone more from just being a stand-up guy or a ground guy to being an MMA fighter.
Yes.
Way more so in the last 5 years than it was before that. Kind of like the early 2000s, you saw a lot of like, this guy's a stand-up guy, this guy's a jiu-jitsu guy, let's put them together and see what happens. Whereas now, if you don't have the full package, you're just not going to... or at least have a very good understanding of where the other side is. I mean, just recently in the McGregor-Diaz fight, Conor McGregor's jiu-jitsu is good, but it's just not at the same levels as his hands. Yep. Whereas Nate Diaz, his boxing is incredible, and also his ground game is incredible. So when you put the two together, it's you just can't. He gets to decide where the fight goes, as opposed to just kind of trying to keep up.
You control your fight that way, and that's a good statement. I mean, we are now, since the 90s, into the third generation of fighters, and again, we passed that, specialist situation where you were one or the other one. We passed the wrestler wave, and now we are in a situation where the newer generations that learn from the videos and the schools of these old fighters are integrating everything together. You see many fighters coming out with a much more rich variety of fighting skills.
In your opinion, what's the most important thing you think most fighters should be working on in Savate or in MMA? What's kind of, if you could maybe have like a handful of techniques that you would consider the most important, what do you think is kind of the best areas to focus your training to get the biggest bang for your buck?
I always think that if you have a good boxing and a great low kick in MMA, I would say, obviously a shin kick, you are a good way there. Again, my strategy has always been a traditional strategy to destroy the opponent's leg, and if you can keep it up and stay around and hammer that leg the way it needs to be, with leg kick or a real leg kick, and combine it with a series of basic boxing. And when I say combine, I mean, have combinations that use both, and it's not like boxing and eventually a kick, or just a kick and eventually boxing. It needs to be kickboxing. That is already, a great arsenal. On that, you want to have, one person that I always liked, particularly at the beginning, was Chuck Liddell. Good kicking, good boxing, and great takedown defense. With that, you already have a great arsenal. Then once you start adding, your knowledge of ground fighting, you can become very dangerous. And when you have those basic under control, your takedown defense, your guard control, everything else flows in, because then you can worry about doing a spinning kick every once in a while, or a spinning back fist, or a flying Superman. That is nice and that works, but your basics are what is going to take you there.
I think that's in most sports. You find that the basics is kind of
always
whatever brought you to the dance is what's going to finish it.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I mean, I know a lot lately we've been seeing in MMA. I kind of got off topic here. I wanted to talk more about Savate, but in MMA we've seen a lot of kind of recently spinning kind of like wheel kicks and that kind of thing. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that to those people who are able to throw those techniques well, that's something they've worked on for a long time, and that's something that brought them to the dance, as opposed to just kind of throwing a Hail Mary.
Yeah.
They've probably been practicing that for, especially like karate guys have been practicing those techniques for probably 10, 15 years, and there's no answer to it really right now because it's something new. But I think, again, a lot of people don't realize that that's something that they've been training for years and years and years. That's not just something they've picked up in the last 2 years and hope for the best.
Yeah, no, you want to keep doing it. You want to try all the solutions that you can put in. All the techniques. I've always been a big fan of jumping kicks. And crazy solutions. Doesn't mean that you'd have to do them in a fight. But you have to have them available, and the place to train that kind of stuff is your gym. If you cannot do that when you're sparring, you're not going to be able to do it into a fight. Hence also the capability of working between hard and light sparring, letting you try these things in a more realistic way. You can always do it when you do pads or your back, but those are not always the most realistic solution.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your artwork.
Yes.
Also, I've always been kind of really interested, especially like Musashi, who was a very famous swordsman. He was near the end of his career, probably one of the greatest swordsmen to ever live. And then at the end of his career, moved into kind of art and poetry. And he always talked that balance in those two aspects, that a person who was great with the sword would also be great with the pen and vice versa.
Yep.
What's kind of your take on that? And how do you, has your artwork affected your fighting and vice versa? Or?
I agree 100%. I feel that, I've always been a visual person. I like to see, good fighting, and I like to see good art at the same time. I like to find solutions on drawing something in a different way that I couldn't do before, with new brush strokes, or new ways of doing it, and that always applied as a expression of myself into fighting too. So I'm a lover and a fighter, I guess.
I think most high-level fighters that I've met are like that. Maybe not with art so much, but they're always I feel like they could make great artists, and vice versa. I feel like there's a tie between those two, between art and fighting, somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe the creativity of being able to work in new techniques and learn new things.
That's where I will go. It's more like the creativity and more the willingness to express yourself with your body or with a part of your body, like you do, by writing or playing guitar, or it's the balance again, like Musashi used to say, between the various aspects of your being, mental and physical. I always found ways to challenge myself, and when I find, for example, new ways of training myself, not just in savate or martial arts in general, I should say combat sport. I like that term better because I'm not a martial artist. I am a person that likes to fight. I respect martial artists, but
let's get real.
You said that.
Fighting's fighting.
I'm always,
dancing's dancing.
I've never been too much into that aspect. Even if I enjoy it more and more nowadays, I've never been a big believer in the martial aspect of these sports. But the capability to express yourself, to balance your mind and your body has always been something that I care, and I'm getting into more yoga or this kind of relaxation techniques that I was not doing before when I was more focused on fighting because I didn't have the time or willingness, and I find it more pleasing. I like to try new things, even if they're not related with my sport, that completely bring you in another direction and eventually come full circle with your sport, because you're going to bring them back once you analyze them, internalize them, and eventually reuse them.
I think that's really interesting. I think that the future of training, I think a lot of nutrition and training styles, I think we pretty much have it hammered down. Mm-hmm. I think the one place where athletes can really be better is on the recovery side, the softer side of training. Yeah. Like you said, with yoga, and just really focusing really hard on your recovery as opposed to just on your training. And I think a lot of athletes and, kind of old school coaches don't really focus on the training, on the importance of recovery like they should.
Yeah, no, that's true. If you look at, for example, the current fighting scene, not a lot of people do stretching. I mean, I shouldn't generalize for everybody, but a lot of the fighters that I train, they have a time with splitting. I don't say that you have to calm down to a full split, but your kicking should be able to comfortably get to a high level kick, to a face level kick. Because I'm not expecting people to throw.
He's actually referring to me right now because I could remember. I had to take an American-style kickboxing fight, which is, for people who don't know, you can only kick above the waist. And I can remember training with Gino and my other coaches at the time just to be able to kick to the waist. I could only kick to the legs.
I do recall
because
that.
my flexibility was so awful. I've never even been able to throw a head kick in a serious competition.
And it's fine. That's what it is. International rule kickboxing. Kick on the leg. I mean, my strategy again is to stay on the leg, but every once in a while you want to change the target because you build muscle memory with your opponent. Eventually, they're gonna start checking or avoiding those kicks. So every once in a while you want to change. And if you find yourself in a situation where your opponent is uncovered, for example, like it happened to McGregor and Diaz, where Diaz was very uncovered on his right side, potentially a high kick there could have provided a good solution, but we didn't really see anything going there. We saw the post-fight interviews, Diaz was pretty good also avoiding, but at the end of the day, if you don't train those aspects, if you're not flexible for it, you're not going to put them into your arsenal.
One thing that I just want to touch on real quick, we're almost out of time, but one thing I've noticed with you always is that your conditioning is just insane. I can remember you, 4 or 5 of us training, some professional, some elite level fighters fighting with you, and you just don't even get winded. I can remember one instance in particular where you were fighting with a guy named Gary in the gym, and you guys were sparring. I think you went like 6 or 7 rounds, and he was gassed. He was training for a professional kickboxing fight at the time. He was completely gassed, and your exact quote was, "This one's about done. Who's next?" And it wasn't unusual. We used to joke about it all the time. You would go 18, 20, 30 rounds and never even get winded, never even, without headgear, without a mouth guard, coaching us the whole time, beating the shit out of us. How did your conditioning get to that level?
Well, let me correct you there, because it's good that you say that. It makes me happy, but good memories. You still want to have a mouth guard, We never went too hard. I mean, if we had to go hard, I would put a headgear, but, we never went hard to the point that I needed that.
Well, I think that the point that I'm trying to make is that we were going that hard. We were going hard to the point where we needed a headgear and mouth guard, and you never felt like... I mean, I can remember you fighting with us and me thinking, I just scored a point, and you going, well, make sure you keep your hand up. Like, you have such great ring clarity, and I think a lot of people have a hard time with that, and just, again, your conditioning is through the roof.
Thank you. It's balance, again, between, teaching and training. I learn how to coach people while I spar. I still do, obviously. And my personal training, I still put in, a list, 6 hours every week, 5 days a week. Sometimes I try to do 6, at least 1 hour a day, sometimes an hour and a half, depends on my schedule. But I never give up on that, and usually when I don't do it, I tend to be very irritable just because I know that I didn't do it,
Would you say that conditioning, though, came from just doing rounds in the bag? Do you run? Is it just...
It's a balance form of conditioning. It's 3 days of running, of elliptical workout. I put in usually between 45 minutes to 1 hour every session. I work extremely on my core every session. Always some core workout, for it can be just abs or some sort of a calisthenic or Pilates conditioning. And I train at least 3 days a week, 2-3 days a week nowadays in kickboxing. Not as much as I used to do, but that's again not my priority anymore. As long as my bases are there, it's easy for me this level to go back in the ring with somebody. I might get hit a little bit more first couple of rounds, but then I get the timing, and I'm fine.
It must be a little frustrating for some people to hear you say that your conditioning is Pilates, especially since I feel like a lot of times ab work recently has kind of fallen out of favor with a lot of people, with a lot of trainers.
Not with me.
Not with Gino.
It's a solid staple of my classes. Everybody knows that at the end of class we still do a couple of rounds of abs done the right way. I mean, everybody needs to get ready for summer. We gotta have them. But it's important that you keep that core going with you train it in kickboxing by using your legs, by using your boxing. But it's important that you do also other movements that are different from what you do when you execute those techniques. To that, I do train a lot by myself. So I do a lot of strengthening conditioning. On my own. When I do my weightlifting, I use a lot of body weight nowadays because again my body changed. I used to do a lot of weightlifting before. I cannot do it as I used to do it before. That's why more toward a body weight workout strategy works better for me. But I'm a big fan of doing everything that you need to condition your body and your strength, your flexibility, your precision, and also your mind. Again, like you said, you need to focus on those break points because you need to recover. If you're when I was working out, I used to work out 3 times a day, and I would work out 5 days a week. And one of the days during the week was lighter, so I could compensate. The 6 days, sometimes I would go running just really light with some friends, just to keep going because I was so energized. But I wouldn't do something that was very intense. It would be just more jogging and chatting.
Where can people learn more about Savate? It's not very big in the U.S., but I feel like it's growing in popularity.
Yeah, we go in waves, and part of our challenge is to deal with the MMA craze. Everybody knows MMA nowadays, and that affects also other styles. I mean, again, kickboxing. Sure, there is always a little bit of kickboxing because it's a form that ties into other styles, but not as much as it used to be. I remember when I moved in this country, we used to go to a lot of fights. Remember Gary and many other ones. But in the last, I want to say, 8 years, has been more and more difficult for anybody to do kickboxing. Savate, people can certainly reach us at the United States Savate Federation. We do have a website, ussavate.org. We also have a Facebook page. Just search for United States Savate Federation, and you can befriend us there and get more updates. Here in New England, actually, we are lucky because we're close to Quebec, where Savate is very developed. So we tend to.
You're not selling it. Canadians and the French. That's how you're going to sell to Americans that this is the way to go.
I tell you what, let me tell you that people can reach me out also at info.edeccusa, that's École de Combat USA, or edec USA@gmail.com. And I'm gonna sell it that way. That's what, going back to the point, just because they're our neighbor, and they do a good job developing that tradition that is French Canadian too. there is a good opportunity for us. We go often there to compete. For a while, you were part of the wave of people that competed here in New Hampshire against them. And people from Europe when we organized those competitions. We are having more challenges nowadays because, again, MMA has become so big, even in Canada, that there is less of that, and people don't understand that that can help a lot of people overcome their basic stand-up fighting.
A lot of times it's hard too to convince people of the benefits of going light. When you see, fighters on TV and everybody's going hard, there's blood, nobody kind of looks to kind of the work that goes into that. A lot of light work, a lot of practice, and a lot of people don't realize, but in Thai boxing, the competitors a lot of times when sparring will go very light and work really hard on the focus mitts and really hard on the bag. But because they fight so often, they don't risk injury in the cage. So even or in the training arena. So I think a lot of people don't realize that even though Muay Thai is known for being really hard, a really hard style, even their training is very light. Their sparring is very light.
It is a more Western approach to the sport, and definitely you will see it also, for example, in the Dutch Thai fighters going harder than the traditional Thai fighters. And you're right, if you consider that a Thai fighter fights every week if not every other week, they're not going to focus on going too hard during their training because chances are they're not going to be paid if they don't make their fight. So it's really important that you compensate for that. The other thing, for example, it applies also, for example, to the French. They have a very high, their national championship is very packed with competitions throughout the year. So focusing on your life fighting, it becomes more important than doing the opposite. Because again, if you hurt yourself throughout the championship year, chances are that you cannot fight, accumulate your points to make it to the finals, and so it becomes more impelling. And as you know, you spar light, you can go on for an hour and a half, feel that you...
Well, maybe you can. I'm fat now.
Well, you can get back in shape. But you can do a lot, and it's a right distance, good measurements against another body, and not mittens or pads. As much as they're good for the kind of drills that you need them for, they're never going to replace the distances and solutions that you can achieve against another person.
Right. And also kind of when you're holding mitts, your coach can only do kind of what they're comfortable with. So it's important to get those different kinds of people in and different kinds of styles in for that. And you also have a company you produce like shirts and you sell your artwork through I can't pronounce it.
I have a couple of sites. I have my personal site for my art, which is through Deviant Art, and it's Gino Nessuno. GinoNessuno.deviantart.com, and that's more like for my art. Then we do the École de Combat USA. Recently launched a site where we
can you spell that?
École de Combat. It's,
or at least say it American.
Oh yeah, that's a killer. That's easy. It will be ECOLEDE combat or combat COMBAT. That's the most common.
Okay, and we'll put all that on the link with this podcast.
Absolutely.
And what is that? That's just the federation.
No, that's actually the school's page, where again you can buy some of the products, or you can just get information on where classes are, and get in touch with me and the other coach, Rob Curran, to know where you can learn about here in the Manchester, New Hampshire.
Do you have a physical gym or a physical space?
We teach in multiple locations. We teach at Murphy's Gym, actually Murphy's Bare Knuckle.
Bare Knuckle Murphy's Boxing Gymnasium.
We keep changing it. But we teach there twice a week, Monday and Fridays, and are open for personals. And we teach also at Prevail Martial Art in the Nashua area on Tuesday nights, and Triumph Jiu-Jitsu on Tuesday nights, and all of the dates and hours are on the website. We are open to expand and teach in other locations. We are just starting to teach at the Job Corps of America, teaching some classes to help with the community. So we're very excited about that, and we're very excited to help the community develop the sport. I personally travel around the country on the base to teach seminars. So if anybody's interested, again, they can reach me at the information that you could provide.
Awesome. All right, we're going to head out. We've gone way over the time I was planning on, but that's fine. Thank you very much for coming in today, Gino. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. I appreciate you having me here.
And I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks again for listening. I really hope you liked it. If you could do me a favor, just head over to Facebook, search for Jagged Iron Strength and Conditioning, and give us a like. I would really appreciate it. We should be the only people to pop up with that name. I'd also really appreciate if you wouldn't mind just giving me some feedback and comment and let me know what you think of the podcast. Hope to hear from you soon.